This is Synopsis, a series of conversations with composers ran in the framework of Abeceda Institute. I'm Neža Zupanc, and with me today is Ramin Roshandel. Welcome, and please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a pleasure. My name is Ramin. I am a composer and also a setar player. Where should I start?
Is setar your primary instrument?
It is, yes.
And how long have you been practicing it?
Well, story goes back all the way to my childhood. My dad used to be a luthier when I was growing up, and he would make the setars in Iran. So I was just around. It took me, I don't know, 11 years to decide to play this instrument, and then I started taking lessons and been playing ever since.
Yes, because you, as you said, you're still active in that. You're an active performer on setar, right?
I am, yeah.
Are you mostly performing Persian, traditional, or yes, mostly that?
Well, that could be a could be a good start to good point to start our conversation. Um, it's yes and no to answer your question. So yes, because I basically grew up in a very traditional school, like very old school Persian oral tradition of teaching. Like that's like you go to a lesson, you sit down, and it's mostly like for for more conservative teachers, it's only oral. So they play something and you play back, you imitate basically, which is a very nice way for students to train their ears.
Mm-hmm.
So I basically grew up in that tradition. But at the same time, because it was like the second or maybe the third generation of this old school, teachers would teach reading music, notation stuff too. It wasn't like 100 years prior to that. So I started learning reading music and those kind of things too. Then I went to music school, and so on and so forth. So yes, shortcut now. I do play traditional because of my background and things that I still do like. But at the same time, um, I have been trying to find my own language, as cliche as it sounds like. So that has a lot to do with some other things that I want to do on the instrument. That includes anything that I allow myself to play, and so and most of these things were not allowed or in that school that I was taught in. Um, I don't know anything outside of that quote unquote traditional way of playing the instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Basically was I don't want to say like prohibited or not allowed, but it was like frowned upon, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, because it has limited. It's limited to what has existed probably for how many years? Probably centuries.
Centuries, yeah. Well, I'm not a historian, but based on what I know, like, and what I've seen and learned in throughout years, there are some like ancient clays in Iran and Mesopotamia area, like from I don't know some centuries BC, that you could actually see some instruments that are very similar, like in shape. You know, they are not like 4K high res plays, but you can tell that, oh yeah, this is very similar to setar or dotar that we see nowadays. Who knows what they would play back in the day, but I'm sure it has something to do with what we play these days. Yeah.
Right. And today also, as a composer and as improviser, you, as you said,
I consider myself an improviser. Yeah, thanks for mentioning it.
Yeah. You can hear it on amongst the recordings of your portfolio, of your compositional portfolio. You are simply applying setar in a perhaps unique way.
Thank you.
So perhaps more to that, I will simply put this out. When I listened to some of the compositions with different instrumentations, it sounded as if you were stemming from your experience being as a setar performer. What I could hear was similar, let's say, patterns where of sound that are not foreign but unusual at a certain instrument, but are actually very at home in setar, or also perhaps a wider even family of not strings, but the setar goes to family. To which instrument family?
It is a string instrument.
It's strings in English.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay. In Slovenian, it's different.
No. Yeah, it's string like ed at the. Yeah, they call it this way. Yeah, like
plucked strings.
It's got strings and you pluck it like a guitar.
It's plucked or
Yes. Oh. Yeah.
And so I just put this out there. Is this a read, or is this a correct read? Can you speak to that? Perhaps.
Sure. Sure. What do you mean by stemming, though? I think we could start from there.
That you originate from there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So a few things that you mentioned: improvisation, stemming from some patterns, ideas, cells, compositional, whatever. That's something. And for sure, like when it comes to the more pragmatical or like practical level, what instruments I'm composing for, and how I'm dealing with like all of the things that I have to deal with. And I think we're getting into the compositional approach now. Yes. So let me let me go back a little bit, and then we can talk about like this past few years. I'm not going to spend too much time on this flashback though. So I did my bachelor's degree in Iran in Persian music performance, and my primary instrument, as you said, was the setar. And then I decided to, in the meantime, when I was composing, I decided to go to the composition program for my master's. So back then, I basically treated that as a means for myself to try something else, to learn something else, and compose something that's totally different. And by totally different, I mean something back then I was thinking set theory, like atonal music, post-tonal stuff. And that's basically how much I want to talk about like those years. But when I came to the US for my PhD um, at the University of Iowa, I had this idea of like making contrasts between that, like atonal, post-tonal, non-pitch centric stuff, with what I knew already from before, aka Persian music. And fast forward to my compositional approach now. Yes, it does start with improvisation, and it has a lot to do with improv because I do consider myself an improviser. So it starts from there by, I don't know, maybe I could call it a brainstorming process for myself. And then I try to trim it, and then choose the ideas that I do like to explore or to develop, and get rid of the ones that I don't want to work on. And it starts from there. Yeah.
And since this is like we now have quite some time to dive deeper into that process, or into also other aspects of your compositional practice. And it's what matters is also what you want to bring forward and communicate to anyone that will be listening. Perhaps we can continue with that process of composing.
Sure.
So it starts with improvisation.
Sure, yeah.
How does it look like after that? How does it come from there to a finished composition that is recorded?
So this has a little bit to do with what I the traditional oral way of teaching Persian music. So within that school, there are a lot of lines that you're not supposed to cross. And composition for myself was sort of a reaction to this authoritarian way of teaching music. So I give myself total freedom to go wherever I want. And by this, I mean, if I'm working with some pitch-centric material, for instance, the moment I establish my modal situation on a piano that I work with, for instance, and we can talk about that too, like what kind of piano. My traditional mind goes towards following some things, because I do have musical ways in my mind. If it's this mode, it's supposed to go this way, and then that way, and then this way, and this is a climax, and this is how you're supposed to end it, right? So this is the traditional, or the common or conditional way of improvising or composing, even in that specific mode. So I do give myself that freedom of going anywhere, and that was like that was basically the premise of my dissertation, that we can talk about that in a little bit too. So then after that, I come up with a let's call it a drawing of something that I have and I can work with. And then some parts of this could happen like in a DAW that I edit the audio file, or I basically compose there, and then from then on I start transcribing. So that's also a very important part of this compositional approach. Then from then on, we can talk about this more later. But from then, that's also a crucial part at this point, where I take my sketches to performers, if it's like for a solo instrumentation or for an ensemble, or bigger ensembles. And then from there I start to make to have like dialogues with them, and then that's like basically where everything could be more practical. Like, okay, is it playable? If it's not, how would you compromise? If it's or these are the options, and yeah, like these are some of the things that probably everyone does from then on.
And from that to then how you treat the content of or what you want to communicate with the music, and maybe you don't use any of those terms. Maybe it's a completely different perception. So what is it that you would then also consider as the substance of your music?
Sure. Well, it started from I mentioned the like making contrasts between this binary way of thinking, like, okay, pitch centric, non-pitch centric, and this was probably the first couple of years when I came to the US and like throughout my PhD here, but then the more the closer to the end of the PhD, I came up with this idea of like not even having these binary ideas, but also anything that comes in between. For instance, I argue that, okay, if there's an idea that's like non-pitch centric and this is a pitch centric idea, aka Persian, whatever that comes in between, and like this transition or transforming status between the two is as important as the two. Let's pause it for now. I'll let you ask or lead the conversation.
Oh, please continue.
Okay, shall I?
Yeah.
So, for instance, my thesis is going to be a 17-minute long piece for symphony at the Ensemble, and hopefully the Center for Music at the University of Iowa is going to perform it next spring. The content is basically what I described now, like in a very short and concise way of describing it. Persian music as one idea, non-Persian stuff, or like non-tonal, non-pitch centric stuff, and anything that comes in between. And back to your question, the content, I started doing basically sketching those ideas. Very simple, as I don't know, I do know it sounds controversial among composers, but I came up with this just tried some sketches on Logic Pro, simply because it gives me the option of like the tuning the piano, or retuning the piano. So basically I came up with a new way of retuning it, and hopefully it will be performed that way, like inevitably with the MIDI keyboard, but connected to Logic and like being amplified in the concert hall and like blended with the art.
It's software, right?
It's a software, yeah.
Isn't it a sound editing?
No, it's I mean, it could be, yes. It's a DAW basically. It's a digital audio workstation. It's like advanced version of GarageBand on Mac.
Advanced version of what?
GarageBand.
GarageBand. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, like Logic, Pro Tools. These, yes, it's a but you could also do like production stuff with it too. Yeah.
So for anyone that hears this the first time, perhaps it's a software program that you can use for recording, for post-production of recorded or audio files, and for in this case composing.
In this case, composing too. Yes. So when I say it's a digital audio workstation, people say DAW. When you say it's a DAW, it means that it could record stuff. You could sample things with it. You could.
I see.
Produce. You post production. Yeah. Anything. Yeah. For this case, in this case, for me, I used the piano, basically what I just said. I retuned the piano. I started with a specific mode from Persian music, and I changed some things because throughout the improvisation process, I came up with some ideas that I thought they would be worth keeping and to work on. And that's like that goes back to the freedom that I just mentioned. Like those are not conventional. If you play that, like those basic ideas for someone who has been trained in Persian classical music, they'd say, oh yeah, this is Persian, this is that mode, right? But if you keep playing the rest for them, they'd be like, oh, what is this now? Like this is not what it's supposed to be. And I do like that sense of surprise for anyone who has been trained in Persian classical music. And I also appreciate the contrasts that I mentioned, because like if you establish a tonal palette of sounds, and then if you introduce a non-tonal idea, it will be surprising, and it's a contrast. And this is like my role as a composer, to work with the two.
So if I understand correct, whenever you are referring to tonal, you are referring to the tonal of the Persian music.
Modal, yes.
Modal.
Thank you for correcting me. Yes, yeah.
No, it's more for me to also make sure I understand.
Right.
What's so generally, and that is again in Western classical music terminology, modal refers to the Greek modes. What is the difference between Persian modes and
there are some similarities, but I would like to categorize Persian, Turkish, and Arabic music under one umbrella. There are some similarities, but don't ask me to explain them. I can only talk talk for Persian classical music.
Mm-hmm.
So there is this term called dastgah. Dast is like a Persian word for hand. Dastgah means where you put your hands or slash fingers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's like the literal meaning of this word. But what it means in Persian classical music, it's basically a group, like 7 groups, 7 big groups and like 5 smaller groups of modes.
Mm-hmm.
And like there's a canon that you go to a lesson, and the lessons that I talked about earlier, you go to the lessons to learn that canon by ear, and your music teacher plays and you play back,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the way that you learn. But eventually this whole canon is supposed to give you a way to speak slash improvise. That's the way that I would like to think about it, and it's not me only, but yeah, that's basically a way, like it's sort of like the syntax of learning Persian classical music to improvise in.
Right.
Yeah. And we can talk about the modes too, like how they work, and yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. So
I think
yeah,
most,
yeah.
because also I think you are the first composer in this podcast, at least, coming from that area.
Sure.
And what I generally observe is that anyway, um, uh, knowledge of Persian classical music is like it is of Chinese classical and of Indian classical, is simply much more limited in this field. So if you could take me and take us through the modes briefly,
Sure. Yeah.
and further on also elaborate, do you on perhaps a specific composition? I don't know if in string quartet
Yeah.
you apply that.
Yeah.
So if you could generally just take us through a little bit and
Sure.
go for a specific example also.
Sure. So yeah, basically to add to what I just mentioned about the modes, imagine each of these modes consists of a series of melodies. And earlier I mentioned some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller. So the bigger ones are more extensive in a way that like it's basically longer
Sequence
of melodies. Yes.
Of melodies,
Yeah.
or of tones? Is it a mode like a scale, and then you build melodies with it, or is it already a melody?
Yeah. So it's the way that it's been taught in like theory books. Sure. Yeah. They write down the scale and they explain like the intervals between this tone to the next tone, right? But throughout the whole sequence, you start from a specific tone of the mode. Basically, yes, you do have a scale. You could put it on paper that way and say, okay, this is my scale and these are my intervals. But throughout the whole sequence, you start from that tone, and this is what the canon tells you to do, right? This is how you start from that tone, and this is how you can improvise or like make melodies around that tone, right?
Yeah.
And then like a group of melodies around a specific tone is called something.
Okay.
Another term.
Right.
And then from that sequence of melodies, you migrate to the next tone and the next tone and the next tone. And like the whole arc of the thing is actually pretty much most of the times in a very traditional, like classical form of it. It's basically a bell form. Like it starts from somewhere, it goes all the way, like the climax is somewhere, and then you land, and the word is basically landing in Persian too, like to the home key or home tone.
And what are the relationship between the different tones? What are the, because here, let's say in Western classical, it's mostly a half tone or full tone. That is, of course, today that's going further into quarter tones and eighth tones, etc.
Sure. Yeah.
But for a long time, it was just half tone and whole tone. What are the distances in the
The intervals?
Yeah.
So yeah, there are some fundamental intervals in Persian classical music.
Yeah.
You have half tone, you have a quarter greater than a half tone, and then you have a whole tone, and you have one and a quarter interval. So these are the fundamental intervals of Persian classical music, and there are some rules that that you basically have to follow. You might come across some like 1 or 2 instances throughout the whole canon, which is like a 4.5, 5 hour long thing, that basically do not follow those rules. But basically there are rules. Like for instance, if you're like there is no consecutive intervals with a quarter tone interval in between. Like this is one of the rules, right?
Yeah.
And these are things that you learn basically when you go to a lesson. And by the way, you're supposed to memorize, like when you go to the lessons. And by oral way of teaching it, that's what I meant. You're supposed to memorize them, and you're supposed to play them by heart next time you go to your lesson. This is like, this is a very, very effective way for ear training, basically.
Yeah. I believe.
I
think so.
So there are also some ways that, for instance, like imagine you're in mode A, and mode A consists of, I don't know, like X number of melodies, like fixed melodies, right? And 1 through 5 is one area, and then 5 through 12 is in another area, and 12 through 16 is in another area of modes, right? Like let's call them sub modes, for instance. And there is another similar construction of another mode. Let's call it mode B. And so that sub mode A, like lowercase a, might have something to do with lowercase a sub mode of mode B, capital B, right? And then you could modulate between this mode to the other mode. So this is like how basically it works. And there are some like common or conditional ways of modulation from mode A to mode B. And these are things, again, these are things that you learn throughout your studies when you learn.
So what part of that, if any, do you apply in your own compositional practice?
Yeah, so you mentioned one of the quartets, and I I really appreciate the Jack Quartet. That
many
basically,
people.
I know, yeah. Well, yeah. We were lucky. We are lucky, or I was lucky, or anyone who comes to the composition program at the University of Iowa, they are lucky to have them. Like they have a residency here. They come here twice a year. So in the fall semester, they come here and they perform their own repertoire, and then they read the pieces that are written for them. And then in spring, they premiere like a series of pieces that they choose. So I think the quartet that I was going to talk about was written in I think in 2019, and it premiered right before the pandemic. It's called Irreversibility, and for anyone who knows Persian music, it's written, or it starts in mode bayat torque, or torque. Some people, like in short term, they call it torque. And this is one of my favorite modes. I have like some, it's very nostalgic for me. So it starts from there. And then, should I spoil it, or?
I think it's these pieces are unspoilable.
No, I mean, spoiling it by putting it into words, and this is something that I always avoid to do.
Whatever you decide.
Well, yeah, it starts from there, and back to the ideas that I talked about earlier. I did have this idea of like we can talk about this more, and like outside of this whole musical circle, what it refers to. I used to think a lot about, okay, I do like this contrast, or like moving away from a modal or pitch-centric area of melodies to somewhere else. So that's like, if I really want to put it into a short sentence, that's the premise of that composition. It's not super long either. It's like around 6 minutes. So it starts in that mode, and it moves away from it, and it's in a from a very conventional standpoint, it's very traditional because it goes back to the home key. So that's something.
So since we are mentioning the tonal and modal, and I'm sensing so often that there's why is the reason that you want to move away from that? Let's say in this piece, is this something that generally applies to your practice, and why? If there's a reason.
That's a very good question. That is basically the reason I decided to compose instead of only working or performing as an improviser. So I did have all of these thoughts throughout and I still do. And the short answer is freedom, giving freedom to myself, pushing my boundaries, and doing things that I haven't done, and things that I'd like to explore as a composer. There's like all these things. It actually, this is one of the things that I kept thinking about this past few days, and I really want to mention here. It took me years to want to use like Persian classical music as my compositional material, and there are a few sentences that stays with me, or have stayed with me, and I'm sure it's the case for everybody. But it took me years to go back to what one of my composition teachers told me in Iran. His name is Nader Mashayekhi. I don't know if you're familiar. he's a composer. He studied in I think Austria with Hauptstück Ramati, and came back to Iran like 10-15 years ago. Was the conductor of Tehran Symphony Orchestra. But he once in one of my composition lessons, he mentioned, yeah, like we do have emotional relationships with these intervals, and it stayed with me back then, and then sometimes throughout my PhD I was like, you were right. So why not, you know, like, because it's and we can talk more about like the first generation of Iranians who went to Europe or even came to the US to study, but mostly back then, as far as I remember, like these intervals were quote unquote compromised, you know, like if there was, I don't know, a moture, for instance, it was a compromised version of it that you could play it on a well-tempered or equal, how do you even say it,
instrument
tune, equal temp, how do you say it, like, you know what I mean, like half step,
I think.
Yeah, you should have, you had to be able to play that sure or that specific mode on the piano. So for years, and it stayed with me too, like for years I criticized that idea too, like, oh no, you shouldn't have, you should not write these intervals for Western classical music's instruments, until I came to the US, and I'm, you know, it's like one of the advantages of academia, because you come across a very wide pool of ideas among your peers. You see someone who's writing, I don't know, microtonal music, someone who writes something that sounds like Mozart, someone who writes something totally different than these two. And so having the privilege of writing something that the Jack Quartet could perform is basically the chance that could lead to something like more developed and more worked on. That's been my story, and that's
That stays true, I mean, to the actual intervals or to the actual
yes,
tradition.
Exactly. Yeah. And then it gives me maybe the courage to write something for Western classical instrumentation, and I'm gonna ask them to play. Okay, could you play this? And it's not
because when you ask Jack Quartet to do that, they probably really
they read it. They read it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct intervals.
Yeah, only maybe a couple questions, and I don't even exaggerate yet. And then they read it through. Yeah. So the Center for New Music here is also a very, very good center. Like it's a very talented group of instrumentalists who are like all graduate students, sometimes even some faculty would join. So yeah, that was basically the story. And it took me years to go back to that quote by Nader, and to give myself this freedom and also courage to write these intervals for someone who is not 100% used to them.
Yeah. I guess it comes also to a question what is, and uh, we are always a bit cautious around these terms anyway. Not always, but I hear it a lot. I do it a lot. Uh, what is classical music? Is it Western, classical, serious, arts, music? So also with, especially perhaps with cases like yours, it comes to a question: what is classical music as it is today? And
Western or Persian?
well, is there universal classical music? Because what is it? What is common to Slovenian classical music and Persian and Chinese classical music and German classical music? Is there something that anyway? I mean, what are those qualities? What do you see as those qualities that, if any, that actually unites all of those? That actually explain why all of those are classical, and why I ask that is simply, as I said, because it seems like there's a lot of unsureness around this, and also almost like a taboo topic in a sense.
Right.
Almost makes you cringe, makes you uncomfortable to speak about that. But then again, why? So why? Of course, there's also obvious reasons, more political ones, I would say, and that might be a second question for me. Is that a part of what you consider your compositional practice? Some sort also contextualization of something in society, in politics.
Right.
I say that also because there were because of, when you say traditional Persian music education is authoritative. That's a political term,
That was such a powerful word that I used earlier.
So I have to ask you. I have to ask you then on about this. That's
No, I'm very glad you brought all these up because it's an authoritarian society, and I don't know how it has been affected by non-musicians, but there was this like, I don't want to say like policing mindset, but I heard from like some of my not composition teachers, but some of my setar instructors that, oh, if you do this, it's not Persian, So back to your first question, what's classical music? I was gonna say, like, when you were asking it and you were explaining your question, I was going to say that something that connects or holds Western classical music together is basically Western classical instruments. But then I was like, I thought, I don't like these boundaries, and it has to do with politics, and we can talk about that too. I don't like to make borderlines, to say, oh, if you do this, it's not Persian, it's not classical either, like contemporary classical music either. I think at the end of the day, and it took me years, maybe it's still taking me years to to put all of these destructive thoughts behind the door when I want to compose. And I earlier mentioned that it took me years to have the courage to give myself the freedom to write what I want to write and what I like, you know, and satisfy something that satisfies myself in the first place. And if I like it and I can listen to it for the second time, there is for sure a third time. And I'm sure if there is a case for me, it's going to be the case for anyone who listens to that piece or to that composition. So back to your first question, I don't really want to make these borderlines. And I was going to say, I don't want to say that there is like good music, bad. No, these are all cliches. Anything that satisfies me and makes me want to listen to my composition for the second time, that's basically one of my rules. Yeah.
All right.
And to elaborate this, if you, I'm pretty sure if you like play the string quartet that we were talking about, for someone who has been trained in Persian classical education system, like I said earlier, they might be like, oh yeah, the first seconds of it, or even the first couple of minutes of it it's written in that mode, but then it's not, you know. And back to the premise of my research practice, yes, that's exactly what I'm after. Like it's this and anything that, you know, all of these transitions in between. And all these are all the things that I appreciate. I have a very interesting example, like back in the I think it'd be the 50s and the 60s in Gregorian calendar. There used to be, and this is like prior to the revolution in Iran, there used to be multiple active orchestras that would play Persian classical music with Western classical instruments. There are still some, yeah, and they do still do that. So is that Persian Persian music? Of course it is. Is it Western music? No, it's not. You know, but for someone who does not appreciate playing Persian classical music with Western classical instruments, it might not be Persian classical music. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in the end, the question is why would I guess this is then your question. Why would you, as you said, why limit? Especially if you come from that background and it's something that's, if you train it so and so many years, ingrained in your musical memory, in your hearing. Your hearing is basically then also based on that music in a sense, right? With all of its countless rules, which is in a, by the way, it seems like every traditional music and also every genre or style, and I really use that in quote unquote of classical music, has a set of rules that are actually usually really extensive sets of rules. It's not 5 rules, it's always infinite amount of rules, that, and most of them are thought by also oral tradition, even where there is written literacy. Even there you don't even know, I claim, how many things you are learning on a subconscious level of how to do something, of how something sounds.
Right.
So in a sense, isn't that not a standard in a sense for if we were to give this another thought, isn't it a standard in a sense for a certain music, a certain sounding music, to have all of these rules on top of it? And isn't it today, as you said, very clear that we are in position as composers that are studying perhaps in universities, public universities, private universities. In a sense, we have all of that available, and one could say you can anyway choose from anything to work with.
Sure, yeah.
Does that still hold someone back? Does that at this point still hold you back in any sense, or are you saying that anyway you are realizing that this is at your disposal and you can work with it in your own creative manner?
Could you elaborate the question a little bit more? I'm still trying to I do like to address it properly.
Yeah. Is it really still something that causes problems when integrating, especially when it's music of your own nationality? Why, for you that is living also outside of your country, is it still something that you see as work with very cautiously, or isn't it today like it's a bit of a provocation question? Isn't it that you can anyway do anything today? You can use anything, any kind of music. I can start composing with Chinese music or Arabic, or I can integrate a raga in my composition.
Yeah.
What brings to choosing to, if that's a choice?
Yeah.
What leads that?
Yeah. No, yeah. Thank you for the.
Maybe I don't know what I'm asking. So.
No. Actually, no. I appreciate that. It makes sense more now to me. I think, first of all, like I said, it took me years to realize, and not only realize, but also to appreciate what I emotionally have connections with, right? Because academia expects you something, right? Like, to a certain point, when you go to a composition lesson, you're supposed to answer the questions that your composition teacher asks you, or even you're supposed to defend them, right? And you are literally supposed to defend them at the end of your studies, right? But also, for me personally, it's like I said earlier, it's crucial for me to work with the material that I like, you know. Has it been or has it caused problems? I might come back in spring and comment under this video when my thesis is going to get performed by the Center for New Musical Ensemble. Because I asked my former advisor, like when I was working on the thesis, to like, is it possible to retune a piano? And they said, oh, don't even think about it. Is it a problem? Yes, it's a problem, right? For them. Is it a problem for me? Yes, it's a problem. Why? Because of course I do like to have an acoustic piano to play my thesis with. Has it not done before? Of course it has. It's still existing, and people are doing it still in Iran. They retune pianos, and it's a piano. It plays Persian classical music. It's tuned with Persian classical intervals. Yeah. So yes, again, it took me quite a while to be able to find a maybe a common point to satisfy myself. And I think it's, at the end of the day, the role of a composer to write depending on how much power you have. If you're X, you can write anything, and the orchestra is supposed to play it. But if you don't have that much power, you're supposed to defend your ideas, and you're supposed to write them in a way that's, compromisable, if it's a word.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, if it's working for you, but it's also working for the performer to play it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But did you mean like such problems?
I was especially curious about your attitude in this manner, and how you contextualize that, since it in the end influences your composition, and also since so many people, so many composers are talking about that.
May I ask something else to what I just said? And it's basically addressing the second part of your question when I asked ask you to elaborate. You mentioned, or is it okay for me to use like Chinese music material, or is it okay if I pick Indian music? If it satisfies you, I would say sure. But I do like, I don't want to bring up authenticity in music and stuff like that.
Why
But
not?
I think, I don't know. It kind of reminds me of food and stuff. But
Of what?
of food, like you go to a Persian restaurant in LA, and you're expecting that food to be authentic Persian, or
Right.
I don't know, like I have come across presentations and compositions of some peers who studied a non-Western classical music outside of Europe and North America. It didn't make me feel uncomfortable, but if they hadn't said that, oh, this is influenced by this music or that music, I would have felt more comfortable. Does it make sense?
So if that would be pointed out, you say, if that would be more specified, that it's influenced by that or that music, you would maybe
appreciate it more. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. But it's maybe what I'm trying to say. It wasn't about the way that it was presented. It was about the way that material was used. I don't know. It's very personal, like in this case. And right now, I'm just thinking about like a couple examples. Yeah. On the other hand, like it has occurred to me, and I appreciate it a lot. Like I remember one of our peers in the composition program. She's a composer right now at the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis. And one time they presented it was like a Max instrument, basically. It was a Max patch, but also presented as an instrument. And they're working with just intonation material as a compositional material. And after the presentation, I was like, dude, I was hearing like Persian intervals. Like, this is super cool. So that's, that's a different thing. Like, it wasn't labeled as, oh, this is an inspiration or an influence by such and such. I don't think it would add anything to it. Would it add anything to my music? Because I grew up in Iran and living in the US now. Why not? But not necessarily because I grew up there. But because I spent years, it's beyond inspiration or influence. For me, it's like a very visceral thing that that I can't not use.
Yeah. Understandably. It was a part of your formation as a human, like from child to grown up human also. I'm guessing that leaves a mark. And since we are approaching the conclusion, I would now ask you if you could draft 2 short messages for any viewers of this conversation. One specifically for any aspiring composers out there. And again, that is despite, of course, you're still in development and you're studying. Nevertheless.
No, I'm done.
Done, okay. And the second one for anyone.
I mean, who doesn't study their whole life? But yeah, I'm out of academia right now. So.
All right. So that and any message for someone that will go and listen to your music now.
I don't know. I will answer this very casually if it's okay.
Of course.
For any young composer, and I consider myself old now, so I'm sure you don't know how old I am, but I don't know. Like it was. I could just say some personal stuff. Like at some point, because of that background that we've been talking about for a while, I felt necessary to go and like take private lessons to learn counterpoint, to learn harmony, to learn instrumentation. And this is like throughout my my bachelor's degree, which was on top of everything else that I was doing within the degree. So if you feel necessary for you to learn those things, sure, you should go for it. But would that make you a composer? No, I wouldn't say yes to that answer. I should be really careful at this point because yeah, you do have to learn how to write music for trombone or for clarinet or for oboe. So yeah, how else are you supposed to learn that outside of an instrumentation class or lesson? So back to the expectations that academia wants people to do. Again, it took me some time to put those destructive thoughts outside of my working room, to be able to be creative. This is again very personal. Some people might not care at all about like the expectations, and they might feel more comfortable to do whatever they're more comfortable with. But if yeah, you just give yourself freedom to write anything that you like, and if you like it, other people will like it too. Second question was, remind me.
For anyone that will go and listen to your
music. Listen to my music. Yeah. I would love to hear from you. What you think about that music, and I hope that will lead into making conversations or dialogues. Yeah,
right.
That's something that I miss a little bit, because that's like, it's something that happens pretty much all the time, like in academia. I defended, by the way, last May, so my thesis. And since then, I kind of miss it now, and I was really looking forward to this conversation. But here to like, to like go inside and like change all those gears and
and it's intended for offering more insights into different practices.
Yeah.
And great. So anyone that will see this will, I think, know where to find you. Your website will be also in the caption of this video.
Sure, yeah. The website is a little outdated. I've been procrastinating.
But there's your contact probably, right?
Yeah, like some stuff, the Jack quartets that we talked about. 2 of them are on my SoundCloud, so.
Great. Ramin Roshandel, thank you very much for sharing in this conversation.
Thank you so much, Neža. Thanks.